All right, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Let's start this session, even though we are still waiting for two panelists who may have problems joining. We hope that they will join us in a minute, but let's start the session. My name is Pierre Jacquet. I'm the president of the Global Development Network, GDN, one of the co-organizers with Campbell Collaboration of this conference on evidence for development. I'm very pleased to moderate this panel this morning on measuring development impact, the role of research, with first-class panelists, whom I shall introduce in a minute. So the theme of this panel was inspired by an innovative project that we conducted in partnership with the European Investment Bank over the last 4 years, basically. And this project consisted of selecting promising young researchers from Africa and the Caribbean, and to mentor them to conduct quality research on the impact of private sector-led impact investments in their region. So that project lasted 3 years and mobilized 3 cohorts of 10 researchers each. And what is nice about the project is that they had to interact with private sector companies to access data and to get their participation around research questions that could be of interest, not only from an academic purpose, but also for the private companies. This also implied that the results of this research should be easily communicable and available in a short time span. These researchers produced 15 deep dives, and what we call deep dives are not full-fledged scientific impact evaluations that would actually imply a lot of resources and a lot of time. But the deep dives still go much beyond standard project evaluations because they investigate very seriously a number of causal relations. And as you know, interpreting causality is one of the difficulties of any attempt at measuring impact. Many of the researchers, whom we call EIB GDN fellows, are present today, including one of the panelists, Charles, whom I will present in a minute. And I want to really congratulate them for their work. A number of their deep dives will be published in a peer-reviewed journal, which is a journal of development effectiveness. So this project, and this is the reason why I'm mentioning it, was a test about the possibility and the value of involving academia a bit more tightly in the conduct of evaluations. In a way, it was bridging a gap that we perceive between a supply of scientific impact evaluations that, again, take a lot of time and resources, and a demand for insight that operates on a much shorter term and even continuous time frame. And we concluded from the project that this is possible. This is feasible, possible, and productive. And we can combine rigor, research-based insights with relevance and usefulness. And this is what we want to discuss today. So let me introduce the panelists and ask each of them, when I introduce them, to react very briefly in one sentence on a question, which is why spend resources to measure impact? Why is measuring impact so important? So let me start with, by alphabetical order, with Franco Conzato, who is Deputy Head of Unit, Results and Evaluations at the Directorate General INTPA of the European Commission. INTPA is a new name of what was called in the past DevCo, so basically involved in financing development in developing countries. So Franco, why is measuring impact important from your perspective?
Thank you, Pierre, and good morning to all panelists and all colleagues and listening to us. Let me just say briefly what INTPA means, otherwise we look a bit funny. INTPA, before we have DevCo, Development Cooperation. In fact, it was a short and acronym for that. INTPA means International Partnership, just to, let's say, stress basically the evolution of aid, development cooperation into something much more, let's say, focused actually to results, if I may say. But to respond to your question, we are spending already a lot of money to try, let's say, to get evidence of what we do. So I think measuring impact is becoming now a central piece of our strategy in making sure we really not only document, but also learn what we are doing. You know, we are basically the European Union, we can say it's immobilized funding for development. So it's absolutely crucial that we are able to document what impact we are having. And this, you know, this is public money. And so we have to sustain, let's say, this ability of our organization through our institution to provide funding, and impact become a centerpiece of that. We have a number of global challenges, climate change, digital, by digital I mean, you know, digital divide, prosperity, which is linked to what you said, I mean, investment and grow and create jobs. And so without having a real possibility to understand what our action at the end of the day produce, it will be very difficult to sustain the funding to make sure that these challenges are properly tackled. And in an international partnership environment. Thank you. Thank you, Pierre.
Thank you, Franco. Let me now turn to Charles Okyere, who is a faculty at the University of Ghana in Legon. Charles is a doctor of agricultural sciences from the University of Bonn in Germany. Let me also welcome Joe. Welcome. I'm glad you could join us. I'll turn to you in a minute. So Charles, same question. One sentence. Why is measuring impact so important? Why you, as a young researcher, have decided to spend part of your professional life measuring impact?
Thank you, Pierre, and thank you, GDN and EIB for organizing this session. And greetings from Accra, Ghana. Coming to Pierre's question, as earlier Franco has enumerated some of the main reasons why we need to measure impact. From my point of view, I think the key point is to try to get rigorous evidence for policy making. And since almost all development actors, both in private and in public, are interested in change, trying to see improvement in the living standards of people, then of course there's a need for us to be able to measure the activities or interventions that are being rolled out. And as a young researcher, I think, yes, now is the main show, I'll put it that way, as in terms of career progression, because impact measurement, as we have even seen in recent times about the Nobel Prizes, some of those frontier researchers have been awarded or rewarded for their efforts in ensuring rigorous measurement of impact. So as a young researcher, it's one of the career progressions that you have to take, and also in trying to also contribute in solving some of the development challenges that we face in on our continent. So that is the main reason why I'm also part of undertaking impact evaluations, Pierre. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charles. Let me now turn to Debora Revoltella, who is Director of the Economics Department of the European Investment Bank. And the department provides impact-driven economic analysis to support the EIB operations, as well as the EIB global strategy and positioning. So Debora, same, why is measuring impact important from the EIB perspective?
Thank you very much, Pierre, and I am really happy to have another opportunity to discuss about what we did together, this GDN EIB partnership program for impact evaluation. And I think it's So your question is really why the European Investment Bank is so keen in having this impact study, a rigorous impact research to understand the impact of the projects that we do. And I think there are two reasons. Reason number one is for accountability. I think now every institution, and particularly public institution, when it's using public resources in order to achieve a certain effect, a certain impact, has to demonstrate what it's doing and what is the ultimate impact of what it's doing. So on the accountability point of view, we have increasingly request for being rigorous in assessing the impact of what we do. But then the second point, and that's also something quite interesting in the project that we developed together, is in this specific project, the EIB was very interested in understanding the development impact of projects that we were doing with the public, but also the private sector. So there were private sector promoters that were trying to achieve some results, economic results, but also development impact in the countries. And they were also eager to learn what works and what doesn't work to do it better. So the second element why these rigorous studies are important is that they give feed for thought in order to learn what works and how to enhance the development impact of the various projects. So there is this combination of accountability and learning to do better in development project that is quite useful and important. And I think we are very happy of what we achieved on both sides.
Thank you very much, Debora. As I said, it was a great pleasure and learning experience for us as well, and we like very much what was produced by the project, and we'll come back to some of the learnings, obviously, probably in the discussion. Let me now turn to Joe Puri, who is Associate Vice President, Strategy and Knowledge at the IFAD, the International Fund for Agricultural Development. She is also adjunct professor at Columbia University, and she worked previously at the Green Climate Fund at 3IE, where we actually knew each other, at UNEP, at the World Bank, and at UNDP, so a wide experience. So Joe, same question, just to start knowing each other and the discussion. Why do you think measuring impact is important?
Thanks, Pierre. Thank you, everyone, for having me here. And Pierre, thank you so much to you. So I'm going to say, give my answer in two parts. First, I think I'm going to take what the previous speakers, what Debora and Charles have previously said, and apologies, I didn't catch previous comments, and turn it around a little bit and say, I think that the primary question is important, what works? But I think we are at a stage now where we've got to start answering the question, what works better? And I think that's becoming really important. So when we saw the impact evaluation revolution, if I'm going to call it that, there was this idea that, yes, you could come in and sort of, randomize, come in right at the end and sort of see as to whether it works or not. But I think what we've realized quite quickly is that we've got to figure out how it works and whether there are better ways of making it work, and then be able to compare it with other strategies. And I mean, I sit in the strategy and knowledge department of IFAD, and I think for me that what works better translates into answering the question of how should it work, right? And that becomes really important. And I think we are at a stage now where this second order question is becoming even more salient for all of us. Because, for example, we know that, for example, farmer field schools might work in certain areas, etc., but in pilots. But we also know that if we want to get farmers to adopt new forms of innovations or techniques, there are different and better ways of making that work than farmer field schools, because actually farmer field schools, as the large systematic review in this space actually showed, works in certain circumstances and on smaller scales. So I think really understanding as to how we can deliver better as we go along becomes really important. And for international organizations, especially those that are concerned with equity as well as efficiency, this form of delivery and how we should deliver becomes really important. And that's why it's really important to have this kind of evidence. And I think, with impact evaluations, we have that measurement technology that can be used to answer exactly these types of questions as well. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Joe. Well, we had actually a number of reasons why measuring impact is important. So one of the questions is whether one can use one product to meet all these rationale for impact measurement, and that's also a question that will probably come back in the discussion. So let me now turn to the first broad series of questions that I would like the panel to address, which is about the role of academic research in impact measurement. As we all know, impact measurement has known a tremendous expansion over the last decades, but not only through academic research. There are a number of pieces of impact measurement that are not founded on economic research, and there is a big question about why spend resources to bring more academic research in. I would like to start with you, Debora, with Joe and Franco as well, and then give the floor maybe to comment on all that to Charles later on, because you are all sitting in institutions whose primary goal is not academic research. So the fact that these institutions decide to spend resources to develop academic research is in itself quite interesting, probably very challenging. So let me ask you to expand on the why you think that is important. Debora, would you like to start?
Yes, thank you. And I may explain a little bit of what we do at the European Investment Bank to assess the results and the impact of our projects. In reality, we developed a framework for assessing development impact, I would say, not only development, because as you know, the EIB is working in developed countries and in developing and emerging market countries. So for whatever we do, for all investment that we support, we have developed a framework that is based on 3 different layers, as we say it. So we have a first layer that is project by project, and project by project we assess the result, mostly the results. We put it in an impact framework, but we estimate ex ante and then we verify ex post the results of the projects that we develop. So we try to assess for each project, example is the direct and indirect jobs generated through a project, or kilometers of roads that we helped supported building up, or a number of beds in hospital, or things like this. So we try project by project, first ex ante and then ex post, to verify the expected results of what we are doing. And that's done for every project that the EIB is running, and it's project by project based. Then we have a second layer, and the second layer is more at the macroeconomic point of view, and it's also involved research because it involves macroeconomic modeling. And we are trying to understand the bulk of EIB lending for EU, and we are also looking at for the extra EU. We are trying to understand what are the macroeconomic effects of our lending, how much this is additional and how much it's supporting the economy, and trying to estimate the short-term effect of our supported lending, but also the long-term effect. Having in mind that you always have this construction phase for projects that then it fades away. It has a short-term effect on the economy, but then you have the long-term part. That means that through our investment and supported investment projects, the economy becomes more productive. So at the end, you may have a long-term effect that don't fade away. So actually, you have a long-term effect on the economy. And that's the second layer, so the macroeconomic one. And then we have a third layer, and that's where also the GDN program for us was entering. And the third layer is more microeconomic level, as we say it. And there we try to have a microeconomic assessment of different projects to assess impact. We go in different ways. So we had the projects in which we were looking at a special program. Let's assume we have a program for lending to SME via commercial banks. And what we were looking at was at SME that received EIB financing and SME that didn't receive EIB financing. And we were looking in difference analysis. What is the effect of receiving the treatment EIB financing on companies up to 3 years after they receive the financing? We were quite positively surprised in this program to see that actually after 3 years, the firms that received EIB financing were able to grow faster and also innovate a little bit more. That gave us the feeling that actually our support was useful for our impact objective, that is supporting innovation and supporting growth and job creation of firms. That was one example. The other example is what we did together. So really in the GDN EIB program, I think what was particularly interesting was the combination of different interests around the program. So we could leverage on very talented, and we have an example here, very talented local researchers coming from deep knowledge of the local environment that had the opportunity to work together in a team and with also a strong scientific advisory committee, and work on assessing the development of specific project of the EIB, the development impact of the project. They had the opportunity to decide together with the promoter, talking with the promoter, what was the best angle to review the development impact. Sometimes it was not exactly the development impact the promoter had in mind, but there were a side effect of the project that were taken into consideration, and that had the advantage of telling back to the promoter a side positive development effect of the project he was developing. So with this program, what we achieved was to have, for our accountability purpose, to have a good assessment of the development effect of the project we are financing as the EIB. We had the side effect for the promoter to learn more about the development impact of the projects that they themselves were doing, and then feeding it back, this knowledge, into the project itself. And then we had a very enriching, if you want, interaction with local researchers, bringing their own local knowledge into the assessment and helping us understand better the context. And on the other side, learning this need of having rigorous impact assessment and bringing back into the local research community to create a class of researchers that are focusing on development impact. Pierre, you're muted.
Yes.
I think I was muted by the administrators, probably because I'm making noise on my side when I turn my pages. Sorry about that. Thank you, Debora, for this very nice insights. Let me turn to Joe and ask the same question. What do you think is the place of academic research in assessing the kind of impact that is necessary for your organization?
Thanks, Pierre. So I think there's an interesting dialectic or a tension that exists between academic research and what we end up doing in the real world. And I think rather than decrying that tension, I think we should celebrate it. There is an intersection between academic research and what is used for real world implementation as well as operations, which I really appreciate and I think is the sweet spot that I'm constantly looking for. So whether you're looking, so on one side, I think what academic research has shown, and the Nobel Prize winners that Charles referred to are a huge example of this. So the most recent ones, Joshua Angrist, as well as Guido Imbens, they talked about the use of natural experiments, and natural experiments give you a very nice instrument. But unless we had those natural experiments, we wouldn't have moved into a space in international organizations, definitely mine, where we learn to exploit these natural experiments so that we can understand what is the overall impact of a dollar that we invest on the ground. Right? So that's a clear intersection. We've used academic research and methodology to then understand what's happening on the ground in terms of what works. So that's the first part. What works is the primary question. But now academic research is also helping us understand what works better. Right? And if you want to compare, and this is my big challenge almost every single day, which is, yes, we know what is the result we want to achieve, but what works better to get to the same result? In humanitarian conflicts, for example, we know all of the evidence shows that there are three particular strategies that a lot of humanitarian agencies, including mine, use, right? Even though ours is not a humanitarian agency. When you want to provide very quick results on the ground, you can, in the context of an urgent need, you can have cash transfers, you can have food transfers, you can have in-kind transfers. Guess what evidence is showing to us, and this is high quality evidence that is using methodologies that have been developed by academics on the ground. We know that cash transfers actually do work better, both in terms of multiplier effects, as well as in terms of the overall nutritional content of people who've been affected compared to in-kind transfers. They are also easier to deliver. I was in Mozambique last week. It is far easier to deliver cash than it is to deliver in kind, right? So that's the second part of the question that academic research is helping us understand. And the third part, so it's not just how much and how, but and what works better. But I think the third part that academic research is really helping us think through is what are the systems that we want to put in place so that we can actually deliver and understand what works better. And this is what Debora is talking about, right? So Debora is talking about, well, we want to set up ex-ante systems. We also want to then measure, and then ex-post, we want to come back and we want to be able to verify that whether that worked or not. Now, academic research also keeps us honest. It makes me recognize as to whether I'm being biased in how we are measuring stuff or not. Otherwise, and this happens in most international organizations, so this is with no commentary on IFAD at all, but I do have a lot of measurements that are subjective measurements that are taken to be, because they are data, are seen to be objective. And then I necessarily have to push back and say, no, just because you're collecting data, let's use first principles of what is a random sample, what does it mean to be representative, what does it mean to actually collect data that is going to give me the unbiased average effect. All of this came to us because of our academic training. right? And then applying it to a lot of the verification that we are doing, but also in setting up systems. So at the beginning of an investment, when IFAD goes in, and 15% of all of IFAD's investments do have to be informed by impact assessments, we do set up these systems. And guess what? It's again those that academic research that first tells us what is the kind of data that we should collect, why are we collecting it, how should we set up those protocols, but also what is the method that we should use to understand the unbiased, objective effect or impact of any investment. And I think all of this is coming to us by academic research. But let's take the other side of this dialectic or this tension. The fact is also that I like to think that when I find gaps in evidence, and I did this actually at an executive board meeting just a week ago, where we were talking about the impact of adaptation-related interventions of IFAD, climate adaptation. One of the key things that I put up, just one slide for our executive board to look at, was the evidence gap map on what works in adaptation. And the key message that I wanted them, but also the academic researchers that I hope I will get across to, is that there's very little evidence on what works in climate adaptation. So I think there is a push and a pull. I want to be able to also influence the direction of academic research and to be able to say to them, look, you're coming into this area, don't go and tell me yet again with another impact evaluation that, oh, cash transfers work or they don't work and how much they work. We've got a lot of studies looking at cash transfers. Please stop. Yeah, let's go into institutional effectiveness. Do institutions work or not? We actually don't have very good evidence in that space, and that's what I showed to them, to the executive board, that if you look at the evidence gap map in adaptation, what changes institutions and what is the impact of investments in institutional change, we actually know very little. And that's where I want to be able to influence the pathway of academic research so that they can come with methodologies and with data systems that can help me understand and measure the impact of investments where there's very little evidence. Thanks, Pierre.
Thank you very much for this very detailed response. And we'll come back to some of the points that you made. Let me now let me welcome Mani. I'm glad you finally could make it, Mani, and join the panel. But let me first ask Franco the same question about what can be expected from academic research and what place you see for academic research in an institution like yours.
Well, you know, I have to come back with the name, International Partnership. This is one of the things we are trying to use to expand, let's say, possible partnership, and the academic work is certainly one area. But as you know, we are thinking to some pool of institutions, not only academics, but, you know, research center. And this can be public and private. For instance, one element that brought us into the issue of evidence was linked to the fact that we wanted to push more digital environment in our work. And as you know, the EU with the Copernicus project, with the Earth observation, put at the disposal of everyone, basically is a public good, raw data about, for instance, the observation of the Earth and the ocean and the air and so on. So the point was there for us was that we are able to produce a lot of raw data, but the key issue is really how to analyze this data. And that's where I think the academic partnership comes in, as Jyotsna said very eloquently. In the EU, we are, of course, very, very much used to work with academics. You know, we have a huge research program. This is an internal policy, and it doesn't mean we can, you know, by analogy, use it in our external relation. But I think this is a big advantage, at least for us as INTPA, to make sure that we can exploit some of these links and be able to tap on that resources too. We will have to be selective because working in a development environment, and I think Charles can say something about, is not the same as working, you know, in the European environment. When you start the panel and remembering the program that you did with the EIB, this is one of the key issues we wanted to look. You know, researcher, and how we can involve local researcher in our actions. So for us, the idea will be really to link this partnership between what the European academic environment can offer and making sure that we have some kind of relation with our development partners. That will be one of our key elements to look at it, to make sure that the initiative can move. Right now, we are looking into that. We don't have anything. We are really at the infant stage. We already tap on the resource of the academic, particularly for the evaluation. But for us now, the challenge is in a way different and even more complicated. And it comes to this issue on how we make sure that this enormous amount of data and possibility that the technology offered to us can really be put at the proper use. You know, one of the key reasons for us to move into this area was exactly that. We produce a lot of reports, a lot of evaluation, both at project level, both at strategic level. But we realize that there is an issue of quality, and second, there is an issue of how we can make use of that. And that's where I think academic has definitely a role to play, but the modality, you know, how they will play this role, that will be essential. As you said yourself in many of our meetings, Pierre, the idea is not really to go into academic work, but into a work that can really help to improve our operations. And there, you know, that's where I think it's one of the core issues for us in designing proper action in this respect.
Thank you very much, Franco. That leads me to comment on what Joe said about this tension which he wanted to celebrate between academic research and real-world action. And I agree with her point. But if I want to play a little bit of devil's advocate, I think that this tension also has perverse effect, which is to separate the world of academic research from the world of action. And I know perfectly well when I go to a development funding institution and I explain what we do, the first time people, my interlocutors, hear the word research, they send me to the research department. And that's fine. I mean, I can, of course, have very interesting discussion with the research department. And I suppose Debora would have a lot to say about that. There is a research department at the EIB, but somehow it also means that research is not considered as an intrinsic part of action and operations. It is something extraneous that can provide useful information, not always, because they work on different methods, different time frames, and so on. There are different people. So that can be indeed fertile. But at the same time, it would be nice to see how the world of research and the world of action can work better together, to the point that research becomes an interesting part of the development dynamics and not something that is used to study development. So that may be something we'll come back to. Let me ask Charles now to react, and then I ask Mani to come in. Charles, how do you, as a researcher, react to what you heard? Are you there, Charles?
Oh, yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes, we can
Hello.
hear you.
Yes. So I think a lot has been said about the need for academic rigor in measuring development impact. And I'll touch on some of the points made by Debora and then Joe. And I think, yes, it has been made clear that there's a need for this type of rigor and also testing the new methods that have been developed. But from a researcher based in a developing country, the challenge is always the limited capacity that we have in undertaking this type of research. And not only in terms of even limited capacity, but there's also gender gaps in terms of persons involved in the evaluation process. And that should be the direction that we also have to take. Even though the academic research is good, and we all seen that, because when academics go in, we are going with our theories and what we have learned. But in practice, as Joe earlier pointed out, maybe a little bit different. And always the challenge is to bridge this gap between what academics think and then what practitioners think. And in our case, when I worked with Poor Internet in Kenya, it was a little bit easier because Poor Internet understood that there was a need for evaluation because they wanted to extend or expand their product. And therefore, with evidence on how it works or how it doesn't work, it is going to support them in that direction. But in most of the time, the language that academics speak and that of the practitioners may be very different. And that is some of the challenges that comes in. And then another issue is the academic work seems to be quantitative biased. And if you go into what the practitioners want, it may even be qualitative in nature. So there's now the opportunity for us to see how we can blend or use some bit of mixed methods where we understand what practitioners want, and then as academics, we factor it in the designs and the evaluations that we want to take. Because until we are able to speak the common language as to what actually development impact should mean and how we go about it, then there'll always be those challenges. So yes, it's important that we bring in this rigor, we learn from the successes and failures and among others, but the steps that we are taking, we need to collaborate and then pull up resources so that we'll be able to deliver on measuring these development impacts.
Thank you very much, Charles. In a way, you are making the connection with the second part of the discussion, which is about the challenges in bringing more academic research into the world of impact assessment and evaluation. So let me turn to Mani, and Mani, I'm sorry you have to join the discussion after it has started. So it's a challenge for you to jump in, I guess. But let me. So Mani is an economist, and he is a non-resident fellow at 3IE after having been the executive director of 3IE in Delhi, and actually that's where we met. And he was also one of the academic advisors in this EIB GDN joint program. So he mentored pairs of young researchers from Africa and the Caribbean. So Mani, let me turn to you and maybe ask you to guide us about what you see as a difficulty in connecting academic research with development action and operations. So that will echo what Joe said about that productive tension between the two worlds. But indeed, there are challenges, and let's hear what you can tell us about these. Mani.
Thanks, Pierre. And first of all, let me apologize to you and the organizers and to my fellow panelists for being late. I have no excuse other than I got my time zones mixed up. I'm calling you from Manila. And so the good news for me is that in fact I had this evening free, which I thought this session was going to be during. So my apologies to all of you. And as you say, Pierre, it's always challenging to comment on people whose comments I have not heard fully. But of course, that's never stopped people like you and me from commenting anyway. So I have a few words. I did hear Franco and Charles and most of what Joe said. I can guess the other part, Joe, so bear with me. Pierre, just wanted to make a couple of points based on what I've heard. You know, there was this book many years ago called Men Are From Mars or Women Are From Venus, or maybe it was the other way around. And I think that there's this perception that researchers are from Mars and practitioners are from Venus. I sometimes think that that mindset is one of the biggest challenges to overcome, because from my experience, they may not be from Mars and Venus. They may be closer, like Earth to Moon or whatever. But I have seen many instances where researchers have been not just tried, but been very successful in actually getting their views heard in operational context, and the other way around, where operational people are genuinely looking for answers in a rigorous way. I cite the example of my experience from, and I date myself, 30 years at the World Bank, in which most of that time was in research, a third of it in operations, and a couple of years in evaluation. And my view is that an institution that can basically get over this mindset can find ways to bridge those gaps. There are practical issues to deal with. For example, at the World Bank, what happened was the research department decided they would fund only 2/3 of our time. The other third we had to sell to operations. And in that way, we had every incentive to make sure that whatever research we did was, and my job as a research manager then was to make sure that my colleagues had this mindset that they have to be as useful as possible. At the same time, the operational people were challenged by the evaluation department to actually show evidence that their programs were working. Otherwise, their self-ratings would be downgraded. Again, that led to this incentive to try to be as rigorous as possible. So I think there are ways to do this. I do think that, as some of you have mentioned, the reputation needs to be overcome. But I just wanted to say that. Back to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mani. Let me invite all the participants to use either the Q&A section or the chat section to make comments and ask questions. We have two of them from Arthur Kissy, who actually works at the African Development Bank and who intervened in one of the panels this morning. And she insisted there, and again in her question here, about the use of research results. And she asked what are some of the measures to be considered in addressing the challenges of research results in operations. And she also insists that the issue is the practicality of some of the outcomes from academic research. And she says that there is a need for mutual understanding of the evaluative question and the use of evidence. So let's turn a little bit to that, and how can researchers make themselves more relevant to operation without abandoning or mitigating the exigence of rigor, and how to define rigor. And it's true that the languages are different, the time frames are different, and what we did in this EIB GDN program is to try to find ways to address this set of constraints and maintain rigor absolutely, but in a way in which we would involve the private sector companies in the design of the research questions, in the kind of work that would be done, so that there would be a sense of usefulness of the work of the researchers from the start. Any view on that, and on that question of the other version of the tension that Joe mentioned, which is between rigor and relevance? Do you see any tension there? How to deal with it, and what is your experience there? Joe, why don't you start on this?
Thanks very much, Pierre. So yeah, happy to take that on, and good to see you, Manny. I think there are a couple of things that I'd like to point out here. First, I think this idea that every time that research and real world application are poles apart. I think we have to dispel that. And perhaps some of the responsibility lies on us, and I'm going to count myself as part of that group, on researchers, right? How just behavioral science 101 is rename, the stuff that we are doing. I know I've had that experience both with UNDP, with Columbia, as well as with the Green Climate Fund, where I've gone and first said, oh yeah, we're going to do impact evaluations, or we're going to do theories of change. And this was back when at UNDP, where I was trying to think of, to get a whole gaggle of people together to think about theories of change. And they're like, oh, that's too academic. But we changed the word. We call them impact pathways. And suddenly it was like, oh yeah, this we understand, we can do this, and yeah, let's get together. So I think part of it is something that is low-hanging fruit that we should take advantage of, which is just using, insights that we are now gaining from behavioral science as well, which is let's change our language, let's rename, and something like this has worked, increasingly over time, because you have to then recognize that, yes, if you're pitching something, you've got to adopt the language of the people that you're pitching to. And I think that's really important for all academic researchers. So that's one. The second, I think, Pierre, you spoke about it, right? Private sector. How do we get them in? And I can count literally on two hands areas where the private sector is really interested in thinking about good quality evidence. And one area is impact investing. Impact investing is exactly where people want to understand, are you truly making the impact that I'm putting my dollar in for? And now impact investing, or ESG, is a $40 trillion industry. I would really like to have researchers come along with me on those discussions when I'm actually going and pitching to an impact investing group. But it is true that I do need those researchers to also change their language when we are going and talking to an impact investing group. The third is, and I wanted to speak to actually Charles's point on, this quant-qual tension. I have to say very respectfully, Charles, I think that horse bolted that stable a while ago. I think we all recognize that for good quant work, we've got to do really good qualitative work. And unless we do really good qualitative work, we can't do good quantitative work. But I think in that very interesting commentary that you made on both capacity as well as quantitative work, there was one other nuance that you pointed out as well, which was, why is the applied world so obsessed with quantitative work? And I'd like to just respectfully disagree with that and sort of say, actually, it's not, and now I'm wearing my implementation or operational hat. It's not that there's a huge obsession with quantitative work. It's just that it's easier to aggregate. And if qualitative researchers came to me and sort of said, look, messaging with or aggregating or synthesizing qualitative work is, we have now found really good methodologies to do this, there would be a huge amount of adoption there. I can bet you. But I think it's just tougher to do that with good qualitative methods. And that's a challenge out to the academics out there. Can you help us find better methods to synthesize, to aggregate findings that we are getting from qualitative work? Because I haven't seen it, right? And if we could, I think, on the operations and the strategy side, we'd be very happy to think about that. My last point here, Pierre, was really to talk about something that Manny spoke about, which was incentives. I think every time that we speak about behavioral science or insights, etc., we talk about people adopting new things outside as if, they are the subject of our experiments. But I think increasingly we've got to use these techniques to look inside institutions and to think about how we can use behavioral science. And I'm actually quite surprised as to how little application, but also research there is in this space that uses behavioral science to change the way we do things and create incentives for people to For example, take more risk, become far more innovative, adopt more research within institutions. And I think that's something that I would really like to put out there, again, as a challenge. And maybe in business economics or in business schools, this is looked at. But guess what? I don't think this is an urban legend. Every time that economics or the science of incentives has found a good application in academia, in the applied world, we've spun off that department and created a completely new department. So from economics came departments of agriculture and resource economics. From economics came departments of public policy. From economics came departments of business administration. So and these are all, I think, exemplifying or illustrating the fact that every time there are good applications where you can find a good body of work and methodology, those things just spin off and become their own departments, which means academia is actually quite happy to do that. We've got to embrace it as operational and or strategy people a little bit more, but academia also has to change its language and think far more about incentives. Thanks, Pierre. You're muted, Pierre.
Sorry. Thank you, Joe. These are very important points. Let me turn to Debora and ask her to react to that.
Yeah, I think from what I'm listening, and I think I will repeat some of the points, maybe put an accent more on some and the others, but I very much share all what we have been discussing so far. I think where I wanted to start is from something you were saying at the just 10 minutes ago, saying the contact of academia is often the research department. I don't think this is a bad thing, in the sense that in institution, the research department is also the department, or at least should be the department, that is not in its ivory tower, and it's well embedded in the institution and knows how to interact with the operational world. You need to know well the institution to be the one that deals with academia on the one side and knows what language to speak with the operational people and know how to move the operational people inside the institution. So I think that's a part of the importance of research departments that are well embedded in the institutions and actually don't aim to be themselves the academia, but deem to be a good way for mixing the academic expertise with own work and be very operational and supportive to operation. And I personally hope that's what I'm doing in the economics department of the EIB. And I really think that it's important that it's in the mentality of a research department of an institution to play this role. And then when we go at how can you integrate the rigorous research with operations, to me, I picked up a few of the elements. First of all, language. I think language is absolutely important. If you start talking to somebody in operations saying quality research, you lost them. And you need to tell them, you really want to know that I can help you. I will do something you don't even need to know what, but I will give you the answer. And that's the way in which you have to approach the operational people. And language and simplification for them. They don't need to know how rigorous the research is. They need to know what's useful for them out of this research. So that's one point. The second point I find extremely interesting is that operational people can help us in research, can help us also in academia in choosing the question. And sometimes I think about researchers in my team, sometimes they come out like, I have the perfect question, and you say, who cares about this? The operational people really know what is the question important. And I think particularly in institutions with the policy dimension, the operational dimension, choosing and in what we did with the DGN also, really the promoter, the promoter in projects, they are really good in telling you what is the relevant question. And then you have to think with your research at how you associate the question with something important also on the research point of view. But that's very enriching on both sides. The third point is this time for delivery of research. As researchers, we know that tomorrow I will give you nothing, and maybe in 1 month I give you something very bad, and I need 1 year or 2 years, or for real impact evaluation, I need 3 years after the data are produced or something. So the time is completely different. But then the main point is let's combine things. So we know that from deep research and good research, I will have a result in 3-4 years. But then that research doesn't die, and the results are there to inform whatever I will do after. And by combining instruments, I can have an instrument that can give the answer after 1 day. And it's an easy instrument. As a researcher, maybe I give him, to that instrument, I give some credibility, but it's informed from all the long-term research that I've done in the past and that I will continue to do. So you combine instruments and you have something that is more short-term oriented and something that is much more solid, more long-term oriented, that also inform how you developed your short-term answers. And I think this combination of elements is important. That's on what you do, but then there is a second element that is how do you align incentives? And that's, I think, it's the most important element. And I think you have to align incentives both for operational people in institutions, but also for researchers. So the alignment of incentive, and I think I picked what also Mani was saying before, who is paying for the research department. I think it's very important that research department or academia work is not only remunerated, at the end it ends up with a remuneration, but it's not only evaluated because the research is super good, because of super publication, but also because of its operational relevance. And I think you need to keep the two levels on the research part. On the operational part, incentives are important, and that's where, like all institutions, I think for sure at the EIB, one of the instruments that I was mentioning, if you want a more short-term oriented assessment, this ex-ante assessment of project that then gets an ex-post assessment of the result generated by the project. This is linked to the bank incentive program. So at the end, the people will receive, the operational people in the business will receive a bonus if they do certain things, if there is some results coming out from the project. So incentive matter for all sides, linking the results of analysis of impact to incentive for operational people is important, and linking the operational value of the research for researchers is important for their own incentives.
Thank you very much, Debora. We have actually reached the end of the official time, but I was told that we can extend a little bit because there is a 1 hour break after this session. So I'm going to use that, propose that we end at the latest in 10 minutes. So let me ask first Franco and Charles to react on that, and then we have a final possibility for each of you to speak. Franco.
Thank you, Pierre. Well, I must say our experience is, of course, that we are still struggling to have research completely understood, or the way we would like to be understood. We are not, first of all, a research unit. We are still serving operations. So we manage the evaluation, we manage the monitoring, and so on. So for us, the challenge is really to promote a little bit of what we were discussing in this panel, in the way we try to make better working our system. Research, in our terminology, talking about behavioral science, means another sector, basically. So it doesn't really have a meaning. In fact, it is there by another unit, and therefore we still have quite a work to do within our organization to make sure that colleagues, they don't have the normal reaction that will say, okay, this is too abstract, it's really not applicable, we don't understand why you tell us that. And I must say that the new data, the new technology to look at data help us a lot. And I would say that one way for us to bring colleagues to resonate around that is what Joe was saying, the dilemma between quantitative and quantitative. To be very frank to you, our role was really try to emphasize more the quantitative part. Let's say, push the idea that we need to look at numbers, and simply by doing so, confront colleagues to get a different relation with the quantitative parts. But we got immediately the reply that, but qualitative is also important, to the point that last week I was engaged in a debate, how do we measure if we can compare qualitative indicators, so I said, here we are a bit going, out of our normal tune, I would say. So what we are trying to do is, anyway, to really emphasize the quantitative parts, because that confront colleagues with interpretation, and therefore open the way, let's say, to have a different relation with the academic world. As I was saying before, we use a lot of our relation with the academic work. They are part of our team when we do evaluation. If we have topics that we are not familiar with, I'm not talking only for our department, in with our colleagues dealing with agriculture, dealing with private sector, the links are very important. But it remains the point that, how you bring them in a way that colleagues are really trying to understand the value of their research. That there is, in my view, still some work to do, and probably we are looking for innovative way, looking at other institutions, how they have been able to bring that dimension into their programs. And I think I'm relatively positive, because we have now developed a kind of narrative that explains a little bit better why we want to invest a bit more in research. And by research, I mean, to move out to the so-called expert view, and try to really confront with what a serious scientific research will tell you on a different areas. As I said, we have new area in which we are going to work, and the Debora knows well. For instance, one of the key priority for us in Africa is to push for youth employment. This is an area that, you don't have a lot of examples, and therefore I think research there can play an important role. Let me add one more thing. Our instrument to work with research is still either we do a contract or we do a grant. A contract means we need to have a product. From a strictly point of view of how the contract is designed, it means, in fact, they are called service contract in our terminology. I don't think this is the best way, to work with the academic work. Ideally, we should have used the grant. The grant is, let's say, the possibility to say to our counterpart, look, we really like what you do, and we want to help in doing that. So, and that is an area where we need to work also in terms of procedures, because even the grant is not, as we say, so easy, you know, to work out. But this, I think, it's a little bit our institutional challenge. You know, if we want to invest more in research, we really need to look critically at some of our procedures and see within, you know, the structure that we have, to see how we can really be able, or let's say, to push this relation in a more effective way. Last but not least, as you know, there are many universities, there are many researchers, so we need to maintain a minimum viable competitive element. You know, we have a lot of organizations that can do impact evaluation. We have a lot of organizations that can do research, and there, you know, it's an important factor to keep in mind, to really push this agenda in an operational way.
Thank you very much, Franco. What you said actually was what I meant when I emphasized this distinction between research and operations in an organization. In the end, it also means the question of how resources are allocated between the various functions of the organization. Charles, let me turn to you. How did you address this question of language and timing? Timing, I hope you didn't only address by being late.
Yes. So before I talk about that, I think Professor White has also raised another important point, particularly the public sector lagging behind in terms of the use of rigorous evaluations. And I think that's a very good point that we also have to highlight on that. I think back to the question that you have also raised, I think academics, we have to be a little bit flexible in dealing with practitioners so that we are able to accommodate what they want into the evaluation process. And that is where I think we have been short for some time. Then on the issue also is, how do we train academics to also write in simple non-technical languages so that either private sector or public sector people will easily understand? And that is one of the challenges. And I think the program that was done, that the GDN EIB program in applied government finance, was in one way trying to understand how the private sector thinks about impact evaluation, and then also to link up with them in a non-technical language so that they will be able to understand. Then I will touch on the last 2 points. Then that tension between quantitative and qualitative, as Joe was trying to dispel, I think is still a very solid thing that exists in developing countries. And I'm in a developing country. And in the department, you see that still publications, we all know publication biases, and it favors the quantitative. So even though in recent times you see some bit of improvement in trying to factor in qualitative elements in applied economics and even economics in general, but still it is still heavily biased towards quantitative. And lastly, probably as the program showed, there's a need for more training in terms of capacity building of researchers in developing countries, so that we are able to also to rise up to the challenge in taking part in these evaluations. So because of time, let me end there and then revert back to Pierre.
Thank you, Charles. Why don't you end by emphasizing, is there one idea, one message that you would like to emphasize about what should be done to actually facilitate this interaction between research and operations?
Yes, so I think one thing that we need to do is to bring the practitioners and then academics together. We need to collaborate more, because it seems the collaboration is happening, but it is at a distance. And if you're able to link the two groups, I think there'll be a lot of improvement.
Thank you very much. Joe, your 2 seconds message to end the panel.
Oh, wow, that's a lot of pressure. I was actually going to cede some of my time to Manny as well, if that's possible, because I do want to hear him. But I was going to say, Pierre, just 2 comments from me. First, I think it's really, Charles, to your point, I think it's important to dispel this idea that the plural of qualitative anecdotes is data. I hear this so much that, oh yeah, we have now lots of data, but those are just anecdotes. And I think we've got to start to inform and build capacity amongst operational professionals as well, and get them to distinguish between what is data, representative, unbiased, well collected with protocols, and what are anecdotes, which are, stories from the field, which are important for their own selves, but they are not going to constitute data. So I wanted to give that message. You and I can have a bilateral discussion about qual and quant, but what I wanted to say was that increasingly we're recognizing, even to construct a good survey, which collects quantitative data, I need to know the space and the context extremely well, and that can only come from qualitative and exploratory research. And the second point I wanted to make was what Franco said. In my next life, I want to be a procurement expert, because I think procurement makes or breaks organizations, whether it's for research, whether it's for bringing on innovation, whether it's for thinking about how to expand our own worldview, even within international organizations. We've got to have procurement do a better job rather than give us standardized responses on how to get better teams on board. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Joe. I will give Mani the final word so that he has a bit more time to expand on comments on what he heard. So, Franco, your 2 cents comments and messages. Your mic is off. So while you solve that, let me ask Debora to come in.
I think the last point I wanted to make is actually following what Joe just said on data. And I think on data so what I'm trying to do in the department is also trying to understand how to use more the big data that are now available in order also to apply them for impact assessment. It's something where I see a lot of challenge, because first of all, you need to understand the methodologies, but there with the younger researchers, I think we have we can develop quickly the competencies. But on the other side, understanding what really these big databases, I'm thinking about databases on payments, databases on phone connection or geolocalization, all of this data, how can we really make them useful for giving answers on the impact of our projects? The way in which I'm thinking is that it's so, unless you build a big competence centers inside institutions, but then you need to really be prepared to have a lot of people that for doing a single project, they really need to work for years. Or you collaborate with somebody that builds this competence, like a research hub, where you go and say, I have this problem, which are the big data available that I can use, and this is the answer I wanted to get. So I think we need on this point in particular, in a nascent area of analysis, we need much more to work together and to find a way where we have a specialization that is probably outside the institution, and to have a dialogue coming with the problem, working together and using this new technique and data in order to have more answers than the one that we would be able to get alone.
Thank you very much. Important methodological point as well. Franco, did you find a way to unmute your mic? No, sorry. So let me turn to Mani then. Mani, you didn't have much.
Hello? Can you hear me? Now I can see Franco, but nobody else is moving.
Okay, but we can hear you.
Yes, okay, great. Thank you. No, thanks a lot, Pierre. Again, my apologies. Just in concluding, let me just make three quick points. One is, I think we've all talked about this need for researchers and operational people to communicate with each other. I think certainly when from the GDN project, Pierre, are we still on? So Pierre, you're muted. What did you say?
I said that we are on. The connection is a bit unstable, but we can hear you. Okay, great. So the first is I want to say something about the communications. And certainly from our experience in the GDN EIB project of young researchers working on evaluating deep dives. As an external advisor, what I found is I spent a lot of my time, not so much on the technical advice, but on the communications advice, on making sure that the research was relevant, which I thought was our value added. So I think that it is a challenge. And what this leads me to believe is that the role that all of you play as knowledge translators is really critical. And if there was a way in which the chief economists of the world and the chief scientific officers of various ministries could get together and share their ideas on what is effective knowledge translation and to really distill that, I think that would be a great value. The second thing I wanted to say is something about incentives. And here, let me just make 2 points, which are really challenges. One is something Charles mentioned on publication bias. I think that if the goal of academics is to publish in the top standard academic journals, there will be a publication bias. And the way that vocabulary is used there is very different. So I think that we do have to find ways to give kudos to researchers who do rigorous work, but are not necessarily published in the top academic journals. The other incentive issue I wanted to mention is I think that it is great to have operational people say what their needs are. I do think we have to avoid the possible problem of their unwillingness to ask inconvenient questions. Which may be not so, well, the incentive for that may not be so great in some institutions. And Franco mentioned perhaps really the need to make sure that we have grants instead of contracts, but even beyond that, there should be some amount of money that should really be no strings attached, so that those inconvenient questions can be indeed answered. The last point I wanted to make is something on the qualitative, quantitative. I think there's a tendency in our world to equate rigor with quantitative and not so rigorous with qualitative, which is entirely wrong. That said, it is very important to make sure that all qualitative research is also rigorous. I think that there's more of a consensus in the discipline about what constitutes quantitative rigor. I think there's a little bit less consensus on what constitutes qualitative rigor, and that I believe should be an agenda for the future. Thanks. Thank you very much, Mani, and really thank you, all of you. I apologize for having managed the time constraint simply by expanding the time, which is an easy way to do it, but not really something that I would recommend to anyone in the room except panelists. So thank you very much. That was actually an excellent discussion. You made very rich comments, a source of inspiration for all of us. So I want to thank you for taking part and wish you all the best and hope that we can reconvene to pursue the discussion in the foreseeable future. Thanks very much to all of you, and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pierre.
Thank you.
I manage at the end.
Okay, that's right.
So yes, you did.
Yes.
Okay, bye.
I was pushing the wrong button. Yeah. Okay. Bye-bye. Thanks a lot. Bye. Charles. Bye-bye.
Bye, Franco. Bye. Thank you.
Yes, you know, I was in Ghana for 4 years, so
Great.
I have a good memory there. We were working with the Legon University, start working at that time.
Great.
Yes.
So,
So good to see you and know that Ghana is still doing very fine.
Sure. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Charles.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Franco.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah, bye.
Bye.